Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the Symposium on Singapore's third National Climate Change Study will now commence. Kindly take your seats and switch your mobile devices to silent mode. Thank you. Ms. Grace Fu, Minister for Sustainability and the Environment, Mr. Lee Chuan Sing, Chairman of the Board of the National Environment Agency, NEA, Mr. Wong Kang Jet, Chief Executive Officer of NEA, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and thank you all for joining us here today for the Symposium on Singapore's third National Climate Change Study. I am Lisha, and I will be your MC for today. On behalf of our host, the Centre for Climate Research Singapore, CCRS, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all. Singapore's third National Climate Change Study, or V3, is a key project led by CCRS. V3 provides the world's highest resolution climate projections for both Singapore and Southeast Asia until the end of the century. Today's symposium will present some of the key V3 findings and feature panel discussions on future-proofing Singapore to navigate climate challenges, as well as what we would need to do, especially following COP28. To begin today's program, we invite you to turn your attention to the screen for an opening video on V3.
Our national adaptation strategies for climate change need to be supported by robust science and reliable statistics. Here is where the third National Climate Change Study, V3, comes in. Carried out exclusively by the Centre for Climate Research Singapore, V3 provides the latest set of climate change projections for Singapore and the wider Southeast Asia region, building on the latest global climate information released by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. V3 is like no other. It uses the latest global climate models and Singapore's own regional climate model that simulates tropical climate and weather processes. Its high resolution allows simulation of small-scale processes like thunderstorms, thus improving model accuracy. V3 answers important questions about how Singapore's climate will change in future under different climate change scenarios. V3 provides long-term projections of sea level, temperature, rainfall, humidity, and incoming solar radiation. V3 will provide a scientific basis for Singapore's whole-of-government approach to adapting to future climate change. It will support agency planning as well as local research on sea levels, water resources and flood management, human health and heat, energy, biodiversity, and food security. The science of climate change is unequivocal. Climate change is a complex global challenge that requires concerted actions by all countries. Our future way of life is now in our hands.
May we now invite our guest of honor, Ms. Grace Fu, Minister for Sustainability and the Environment, on stage to deliver the opening address. Minister, please.
Happy New Year to all. And after watching the video, I'm already feeling very hot and humid. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As we start the new year, I thought we would share some reflections from the recent COP28 in Dubai last month to give us a sense of where we have come and where we are heading. COP28 marked the first ever global stocktake of the world's progress towards meeting the goals of the 2015 Paris Agreement. For the first time, a decision has been reached to transition away from fossil fuels in our energy systems. And more than ever, there is a realization that we may have the means to make the necessary course corrections to get to net zero by scaling up renewable energy deployment, energy efficiency improvement, and removing the stock of carbon in the atmosphere. However, the global stocktick was also a stark reminder that current efforts are not sufficient to limit the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees C. And this was at the heart of most of the discussion stretching deep into the night during COP28, that we cannot afford to sit idly by because effects are already here and affecting our lives. According to the World Meteorological Organization, 2023 is the warmest year on record. Across the globe, communities experience extreme weather events, from deadly wildfires in Canada and Greece to torrential rains and floods in India, Pakistan, and China, and the sweltering heat wave in Southeast Asia. In Singapore, we matched our historical high temperature of 37 degrees C in May 2023, and the heat, coupled with high humidity in our environment, brings serious health risks. Such extreme weather occurrences are projected to increase in frequency and intensity, and undoubtedly, many of us are concerned how much more worse that they may become and how we are preparing. Climate change is an existential challenge for Singapore, and the government treats it with utmost seriousness. We are investing significantly to better understand it and starting our planning and preparatory works. Since 2007, we have undertaken 3 national climate change studies to better understand the impact of climate change on Singapore. The 3rd National Climate Change Study, or V3, is the latest. Led by the Centre for Climate Research Singapore, CCRS, V3 provides the world's highest resolution climate projections for Singapore and the Southeast Asia region until the end of the century. Working off the 6th Assessment Report, AR6, of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, V3 shows climate projections based on 3 global emission scenarios, low, medium, and high, with the effects of climate change more pronounced under the high emissions scenario. V3 is the result of years of careful investments in not only climate science, but also supercomputing. CCRS partnered the National Supercomputing Center, NSCC, to work on coarse global climate models to obtain final climate projections for Singapore and the region. This is akin to zooming in from a big world map to a map of Singapore that displays our streets and landmarks. To achieve this, the team had to make sense of billions of climate data points spanning multiple decades. I congratulate CCRS and NSCC on the successful completion of V3. Well done, team. This achievement advances scientific understanding of our tropical climate and sets a benchmark for future climate projections. More importantly, V3 provides a common scientific basis for all interested parties, government agencies, businesses, academia, and community groups to prepare for a climate-resilient future. V3 shows that we will have to contend with more extreme climate conditions, higher temperatures, heavier rainfalls, and longer and more frequent dry spells. These climate conditions may also lead to other indirect climate challenges, including disruptions to water and food. Armed with these projections, we will strive to safeguard a sustainable, resilient, and livable Singapore for our future generations, just as our forefathers had done for us. On mitigation, to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement in limiting global warming, a global solution is required. We will do our part. We have committed to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 and have been taking active steps to mitigate climate change and transit to a low-carbon future. From 1st Jan, we have raised our carbon tax to $25 per tonne, and we will progressively raise the carbon tax level further to 50 to 80 range by 2030. As a small alternative energy disadvantaged island nation, we have looked towards innovation and collaboration to transform our energy supply. We're making innovative use of our limited land by deploying solar panels on rooftops and reservoirs and are collaborating on cross-border green energy trade. Decarbonization of the international maritime and aviation sectors is also high on our agenda. We're preparing our maritime hub for a multi-fuel transition. We are piloting projects for biofuels, methanol, and ammonia, and we've also been collaborating with other international ports and partners to promote green and digital shipping corridor. On the aviation front, we are home to the largest production facility for sustainable aviation fuel. We're exploring ways to promote the offtake of SAF to regional and international airlines at Changi Airport, moving the needle on low-carbon travel. The government will co-create solutions on adaptation with the community by setting aside resources and strengthening our climate adaptation plans. With the release of V3, we will review our existing plans and ensure their relevance. We will also look out for new climate risks that may require attention, and I'll highlight two aspects of climate impacts. First, on tackling rising sea levels. This presents an opportunity to reimagine the design of our coastlines, to create new benefits such as additional recreational spaces for the community and conserving nature and biodiversity. Last November, we announced plans to start technical studies for the Long Island, which could involve reclaiming around 800 hectares of land and protect the low-lying east coast of Singapore from rising sea levels. This will integrate coastal protection with future land use needs, create a new freshwater reservoir to ensure long-term water resilience, and create new possibilities for parks and recreational activities. We will take into consideration stakeholders' views and suggestions from our coastal conversations led by PUB, and we will seek feedback from stakeholders on the plans for the Long Island and other segments of the coast. To enhance our engineering capability, we launched the Coastal Protection and Flood Resilience Institute, or CFI, Singapore, hosted at NUS. This brings together the strengths of local institutes and the industry to take on this decade-long challenge. The second part is about coping with rising temperatures. We have utilized passive design strategies to remain cool in our warm climate. These include intensifying greenery in our urban areas and orienting buildings along the north-south direction to reduce heat gain. More recently, we have used measurements, modeling, and simulation to improve our city design and enhance our knowledge of urban heat and its impact on human health. We are also actively strengthening our community's resilience to cope with heat. Last year, we launched the Heat Stress Advisory to empower residents to make more informed decisions when engaging in outdoor activities. Specific sectors such as employers of outdoor workers, schools, and operators of residential homes have also put in place enhanced measures to protect vulnerable segments from heat stress. As a broader point, we will need to continue to deepen our understanding of these climate risks to inform our long-term plans. CCRS launched a first grant call last year under the Climate Impact Science Research Program. I'm pleased to announce that 8 projects have been awarded under the first grant call to a diverse group of researchers across our institutes of higher learning. Armed with the V3 results, these projects will investigate the impact of climate change on vector-borne and chronic diseases, changes in our tropical forest landscape, and our food security, to name a few. Today, CCRS will launch the second grant call for proposals to better understand climate change impacts on our water resources, maritime and port infrastructure, the incursion and spread of vector-borne and zoonotic diseases, and our abilities to adapt to heat. I encourage our scientists and industry partners in the audience today to participate in the grant call. Just as with decarbonization efforts, countries have to work with and support one another to accelerate climate adaptation. Singapore will contribute expertise and resources for international capacity building, such as in the IPCC process. Professor Winston Chow, who is here today with us, is the co-chair of the IPCC's Working Group 2, and he will lead the next cycle of work in the 7th Assessment Report, AR7, to assess climate change impacts, adaptation, and vulnerabilities across diverse communities and ecosystems. Can I ask Professor Winston Chow to stand and be acknowledged? You don't understand the heavy responsibility that's on you and for the next few years, right? These findings, the IPCC AR7, will serve as a globally recognized basis for international negotiations at future UN climate change conferences. We will also share our V3 data with our regional partners through the ASEAN Specialized Meteorological Center to support scientific understanding of climate change and associated impacts. And we will provide V3 data to inform the climate impacts assessment tools of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations to enable users in our region to conduct more detailed assessments of their agriculture sectors and equip themselves better to respond to our climate change. Everyone has a part to play in tackling climate change. CCRS will make the findings publicly available via the Data Visualisation Portal to encourage greater access. With this information, researchers can co-create climate resilience solutions and communicate important scientific knowledge. Businesses can lead the way by adopting more sustainable practices, tackling your carbon footprint, and setting a net zero target year. Community groups can raise awareness about climate change and mobilize action, such as nature conservation. And I hope today's symposium will give you a renewed sense of purpose and energy in climate action. I wish you all a very fruitful session ahead, and I repeat what I've heard in the video. The future is in our hands, our collective hands. Thank you and have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We will now be moving on to the launch of the Data Visualisation Portal. May we invite the following guests to join us on stage for the launch, please. Ms. Grace Wu, Minister of Sustainability and the Environment, Mr. Lee Chuan Sing, Chairman of the NEA Board, and Mr. Wong Kang Jet, CEO of NEA. So without further ado, we will now be counting down to the launch of the V3 Data Visualisation Portal. May we invite Minister, Chairman, and CEO to place your hands on the globe in 3, 2, 1. Thank you, Minister, Chairman, and CEO. Please remain on stage for a short photo-taking session. Thank you. May we now invite you to return to your seats for the next segment of our program. The findings from V3 will be hosted on the V3 Data Visualisation Portal. The portal aims to make the findings accessible and actionable, empowering stakeholders in both Singapore and Southeast Asia to address the local impacts of climate change effectively. Please turn your attention to the screen for a video on the Data Visualization Portal.
Our planet is undergoing a transformation unlike any we've seen before. The climate is changing, and it's important to understand how it will impact our future. Welcome to the Data Visualization Portal for Singapore's third National Climate Change Study. At the heart of the portal is the Climate Visualizer, where you can explore recent and future changes in the atmosphere and sea level through maps and time series plots. View how Singapore's temperature, rainfall and humidity have changed since the 1980s from data obtained from our meteorological stations. This knowledge helps us better appreciate the relative scale of future changes. Rising sea levels pose a significant threat to low-lying areas and coastal communities. Examine how sea levels have changed in recent years as measured from tide gauge data around Singapore and from satellite measurements of sea surface height for the Southeast Asia region to gain valuable insight. The third National Climate Change Study, or V3, provides cutting-edge insights into the future of our region. With high-resolution climate futures projected until 2100 for Singapore and Southeast Asia, gain a deeper understanding of the extent of future climate change under 3 different scenarios of high, medium, and low future carbon emissions. With the Climate Visualizer, you can see the projections of key climate variables on a scale as fine as 2 by 2 kilometers for Singapore and 8 by 8 kilometers for the Southeast Asia region. View future uptrends of daily maximum and minimum temperatures over Singapore and the extent of annual mean temperature rise across Southeast Asia by end of the century. See how rainfall extremes will intensify across Singapore and Southeast Asia, and how humidity varies in different parts of the region. Discover how sea levels could change at 6 tide gate locations around Singapore and at other locations around the region up to 2150. Learn about the contributions from different components of sea level change, such as melting glaciers and vertical land motion at each of the locations. Learn more about the science and implications behind the V3 climate projections for Singapore and the region. Download the V3 technical report and report for stakeholders, and view other useful resources such as the infographic, brochures, and videos. Visit the V3 Data Visualization Portal now and learn more about Singapore's third National Climate Change Study.
We encourage all to visit the portal to learn and visualize how the climate is expected to change in both Singapore and Southeast Asia. For the next segment of our program, I will hand the stage to the Deputy Director of CCRS's Department of Climate Research, Dr. Aurel Moiser, to share with us some of the key findings from Singapore's third National Climate Change Study. Dr. Moiser, please.
Thank you. Ms. Grace Fu, Minister for Sustainability and Environment, Mr. Lee Chuan-Seng, Chairman of the National Environment Agency, NEA, and Mr. Wong Kang-Chet, Chief Executive of the NEA. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. This is the end of a long journey, and we're finally here. So I especially want to point out the efforts of the team who made it happen and who worked so hard for such a long time. My job here is to provide a bit of scientific background to some of the things you already heard, and very, very nice presentation from the Minister. I'd like to give a bit of an insight on what V3 is all about before showing some of the key findings on V3 in terms of climate change for Singapore and the region. So, looking behind the making of V3 as a regional climate change projection study, the key to understand what it is you heard before is that the input in terms of where Singapore and the world is heading in the future is to understand the socio-economic pathways that are predetermined in terms of standardized pathways into the future. These are the key inputs for the global and regional climate models in terms of what would the future climate look like. And from the 5 scenarios under the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 6th Assessment Report, V3 used the 3 that are indicated here, the high, medium, and low scenario, to give an understanding of where the climate might move towards for Singapore and the region. So this is one of the underpinning things to understand climate change projections. The next is to have a bit of a look at what tools we're using. So we're starting off at global climate models, and every IPCC assessment cycle is underpinned by these large global standardized experiments of global climate models running future experiments. And what CCRS did is we evaluated that set of 50+ models and took the 6 best that are most skillful for our region and used those ones to downscale to very high resolutions. Now, in these models, both on global and regional scale, what is actually happening is that there is a net of grids laid across the domain, and in each grid, the standard equations of motions and energy are being solved. And each grid connects to other grids to overall provide the connected Earth system and how it moves forward, given a pathway as I outlined before. So on global scales, the grid resolution is far too coarse to be really of very much interest to Singapore, and typically 150 kilometers by 150 kilometers. Singapore is not even on the map. So therefore, the downscale is an absolute necessity to provide important information for the Singapore government to understand how the climate is changing under the various pathways. So what we did in V3, after sub-selecting and evaluating the 6 of those global models, is we used our own regional climate model to downscale the information from the global 150 kilometer scale to a much higher resolution scale over initially a large Southeast Asian domain down to 8 kilometer, and then further over the smaller domain that still encapsulated Sumatra and mainland Peninsula Malaysia, as well as Singapore, down to 2 kilometers, which is at the moment, as was mentioned before, the highest resolution regional climate projection data set available. There's nothing like this in this region. And so we are ahead of the game from looking at all the other groups in the world who are producing regional high-resolution climate change projections. Of course, everything is aligned to IPCC 6 assessment reports in terms of the scenarios, in terms of the modeling underpinning there. So V3 provides the latest and the best there is available. Just to give you a bit of an insight on the journey that we've had. So from the very beginning, we had this really strong stakeholder engagement. We talked to everybody and anybody who had interest in information on climate change projections and impacts. And we ran stakeholder workshops where we had more than 20 agencies attending. And the key questions for us to ask them is, what is this you need to know? And that helped us in designing the study and designing what sort of variables and fields we really need to look into, and what sort of data frequency we need to provide. So PUB is a typical example, who need high frequency data to look at their future intensity, duration, and frequency curves for drainage parameters. So this is the information we took in and then designed the study and ran 2 parallel pathways. One was on doing the downscaling that I just discussed in terms of the subselection of the models and the downscale, 2-step downscaling over the domains. The second pathway, which is actually a different kind of methodology, is that led to the development of the latest set of sea level rise projections for Singapore and the region. Again, this methodology is based on what IPCC 6th assessment is using, and we actually re-ran code that they were using for their assessment to update Singapore's tide gauges to the best information available. So if you go to the visualization portal, the information on sea level rise there is what we call AR6+, because we actually enhance this by using local information on vertical land movement, which IPCC didn't have available to that extent. So V3 was a whole nation effort, and I just wanted to highlight, apart from the core team that worked for over 4 years at CCRS on this, we had incredible support from the National Supercomputing Center in Singapore to do the actual simulations, to help us with running the model. It took 3.5 years to run the different modeling simulations on Singapore's most powerful supercomputer. So it gives you a bit of an idea of what the effort is. We created more than 10 petabytes of data that we've analyzed and processed. As I said, we always had strong stakeholder engagement, not just in the beginning, but throughout the project. We engaged with agencies in Singapore to understand whether we are on the right path, to give them early insight into where things are heading. So for us, this was an important accompanied process. Okay, so moving on to give you some of the key findings around sea level, rainfall, temperature, and winds. And just as a reminder, what I'll show mostly are end of century average projections compared to historical average observations. So let's start with mean sea level. So the mean sea level around Singapore could rise by more than 1 meter by the end of the century and up to 2 meters by 2150. And what you see here are 2 examples from 2 of the 6 tide gauges that we provide information from, and these are typical IPCC style time series that show you the evolution of mean sea levels into the future by 2100, and a box next to it that shows where this average information ends up in 2150. And across Singapore, we see that the sea level rise is quite homogeneous for the 6 tide gauges in Singapore, and these are, as I said, these are what we call the AR6+ projections. These include enhanced data that we got from the Singapore Land Authority on vertical land movement in Singapore. Let's move to rainfall. A couple of storylines here. First of all, as rainfall is a parameter in the Earth system that shows much more natural variability than, for example, temperature, it is always necessary to look closer into the seasonality of the rainfall and rainfall changes, because we know that we have a fairly strong seasonality. So here the information is actually separated into what we see as the key seasons for Singapore, including the dry and wet phases of the monsoon season. And in general, overall, the information that we can see is occurring is that the wet months are getting wetter and the dry months are getting drier. For the 3 scenarios here, you see that across the changes, these are percent changes in rainfall, in mean rainfall, and when you go and have a look at these things at the stakeholder report, you will also see additional information on the actual range of changes. What is shown here are just sort of the average change by the end of the century for the 3 scenarios. If we look at extreme rainfall, and so this is extreme expressed in the 99th.9 percentile, for those of you who understand percentiles, but it's basically an event that occurs maybe once every year. You'll see one of those events, and And so if we look at how this might change in the future by the end of the century, we will see that the extreme daily rainfall increases not only across all the seasons, but also across all the scenarios. So similarly to what we saw in the 5th assessment report, what we see globally is the extreme rainfall is increasing. And here you have an example for April, May, and October and November season in terms of the changes in that extreme daily rainfall. Let's look at the other side of rainfall, which is the drier part, which is dry spells. And here what we see is that the dry spells are getting more frequent, and this is on the left-hand side, and also the duration is increasing as well, which is on the right-hand side, again, across all of the scenarios by the end of the century. Let's move on to temperature. And so this is the air temperature at the surface. And so what we see here is daily mean temperature and daily maximum temperature. And by the end of the century, under all of the scenarios, we see the increase, of course. And here you see the actual range of values. If you want to know how much change that is, that's between 0.5 degree and up to 5 or just above 5 degree change in temperature at the higher end of the scenario. What does that mean to heat? So here we're looking at what is called the wet bulb global temperature, and the wet bulb global temperature is a metric that not only takes temperature into account, but also humidity, wind, and solar radiation. And it is now the key metric for the Singapore government to understand heat stress, and the MSS is also employing a network of WBGT monitors around Singapore to continue to monitor heat stress. And so we're looking here at how WBGT is changing in the future. Again, these are the ranges of the actual values. If you look at the change from the baseline, you look again at something between 0.5 degree and 4, just above 4 degrees change in WBGT. So what does it mean in terms of the actual heat stress days? And we heard earlier that we now have a heat health warning system in Singapore that was recently launched. And so here we're looking at how many days would we see in the future where the daily maximum WBGT is equal or would exceed the 33 degree threshold during the year. And again, you see there is quite a big range, with the best case scenario looking between 50 and 130 days in the future, and the worst case scenario between 200 and 320 days per year. Lastly, I just want to briefly talk about surface wind speeds. So this is where we see, particularly in the monsoon seasons, where there's enhanced flow in general coming towards Singapore, that we see an increase in wind speeds during those seasons, as well as during April, May into monsoon. Now these wind speed changes are not very drastic, so they're, as you can see, on average only reach a maximum of nearly 14 degrees, considering that the average wind speed in Singapore is fairly low in the baseline. So just to understand how this, what this actually means. Okay, so this was all about Singapore, which was of course the priority one focus for the V3 study. When we look further abroad, and as you remember, we do have this amazing 8-kilometer data set that covers all of Southeast Asia. So we and as you look into our reports, you will find very similar projections for most of Southeast Asia in our report. I just want to provide a very brief summary here. Basically, what we'll see with regard to sea level is that sea level is projected to rise across the region everywhere, but with very different rates. And the rates depend on the location, and also, of course, on things like vertical land movement for the different coastlines around Southeast Asia. We also see very different rainfall trends in Southeast Asia. Some areas where we see very strong increases in some seasons, and in some areas where we see really strong decreases and certainly drought behavior in some of the regions. We see, similar to Singapore, a much hotter Southeast Asia in the future by the end of the century, especially under the worst case scenario. And it also increase in wind speeds during particular seasons, especially in June, July, and August. But as I said, this is just a teaser. The report has a lot more information on Southeast Asia, on our analysis. And so there we are. I encourage you to have a look. The stakeholder report is probably the most digestible for the keen interest, scientifically interested people. Go to the science report and have a look there. We did a huge analysis of all the different components of the system. And so everything is at the Data Visualization Portal. You saw the video. You can look at the images, but also look at brochures and videos and as I said, the reports. But you can also have a look at our, what I call V3 on a page, the key climate change projections for Singapore infographic, which has the key findings in visualized form, but also in 4 different languages on our portal. I'd like to finish my presentation by providing the bridging again to what our Minister Grace Fu mentioned already, is the release and the award of the first call of the Climate Impact Science Research Program studies that are using our data set to address some of the key scientific question on climate change impacts around biodiversity, food security, impact of heat on human health, energy, vector-borne disease, and others. So what V3 did is it created this unique data set that everyone can use locally, regionally, to understand the impacts of climate change in the coming decades. And with that, I thank you and hope that you had a nice understanding of what V3 was all about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Moiser. Climate change is a global challenge, and Singapore is taking firm actions to do our part and build a sustainable future. The Singapore Green Plan 2030 is a whole-of-nation movement to advance Singapore's national agenda on sustainable development. May we now invite all guests to turn your attention to the screen for a video on the Green Plan.
Climate change, an existential threat of our times, a crisis that waits for no one.
Our Singapore Green Plan 2030 is a whole-of-nation movement to advance Singapore's sustainable development. The Green Plan strengthens our commitments under the Paris Agreement and the UN 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. It also positions us to achieve our net zero emissions aspiration by 2050.
Our Green Plan charts ambitious and concrete targets over 5 key pillars. Climate change brings on new and long-term challenges to Singapore. So, we need to build a resilient future to tackle these risks. We are investing in climate research and studying how to fortify our coastlines against rising sea levels. To tackle soaring temperatures, we are designing effective heat mitigation strategies. We are safeguarding our water and food supply to ensure we will always have enough, despite changing weather conditions and supply disruptions. Here at home, we are growing more food locally, working with farms to expand their production capacities and capabilities in a climate-resilient way. Singapore's transformation into a city in nature never stops. We are building up our carbon sinks by extending greenery throughout our island. While safeguarding our core green spaces, we're also making parks more accessible to everyone. As we intensify greening across Singapore, we bring nature and our rich biodiversity closer to us, ultimately creating a green, livable, and sustainable home for all Singaporeans. Small actions can create a big impact. Today, we're living more sustainably to leave behind a smaller carbon footprint, while also cultivating greener habits and mindsets for our next generation. In schools, sustainability is integrated into our curriculum, campus, culture, and community to nurture our students as stewards of the environment. By pursuing a circular economy, we reuse and recycle precious resources so that nothing goes to waste. The extended producer responsibility for e-waste and packaging waste is an important next step in achieving sustainable living. Walking, cycling, and taking public transport are the most eco-friendly ways to travel. So we will continue to expand our public transport network with more cycling paths to make our commutes even greener. Singapore is making decisive moves towards cleaner energy sources and building more energy-efficient infrastructure. Our city will be connected by greener public transport. Electric vehicles will power every move on our roads, and our air and sea hubs will also run on cleaner energy. A sustainable future starts with rethinking how we power our country. We are greening new and existing buildings while working with occupants to optimize their energy consumption. Solar is our most viable clean energy option, and we are maximizing it where we can, from building rooftops to reservoirs and other open spaces. We are also working with partners to develop regional power grids, as well as low-carbon alternatives like hydrogen to decarbonize our energy sources and enhance our energy security. Singapore is transitioning to a greener and more sustainable economy. The journey of decarbonization has already begun, and we are helping our enterprises to adopt sustainable practices while seizing new jobs and growth opportunities in the green economy. The carbon tax introduced in 2019 is an important step in this transition. Singapore is committed to supporting our industries, enterprises, and workers to harness sustainability as a competitive advantage. We are also developing cross-border partnerships through green economy agreements with various countries. The 5 Green Plan pillars are supported by 2 enablers: a green government and a green citizenry. Our public sector is leading the way to decarbonize operations and embed sustainability in our core business, while partnering and empowering communities to take action today.
As a global community, we are all in this together. The path to a better world starts with you and me. We can all play our part and live sustainably today. Let's forge a better and greener Singapore together.
In the face of climate change, it is important to ensure that Singapore is well prepared to navigate the climate challenges that will come our way. Next, we will have a panel discussion on how the updated climate projections from V3 will be used to future-proof Singapore on various fronts, including coastal and flood protection, urban infrastructure, food security, and biodiversity. Our moderator for the panel discussion will be Professor Dale Barker, Director of CCRS. He will be joined by our esteemed panelists, Ms. Hazel Khoo, Director of the Coastal Protection Department at the PUB, Singapore's National Water Agency, Mr. Chew Wen Tong, Group Director for Research and Development at the Urban Redevelopment Authority, Professor William Chen, the Michael Pham Endowed Professor and Director of Food Science and Technology at the Nanyang Technological University, and Dr. Karen Toon, Director for Coastal and Marine at the National Parks Board. If you have any questions that you would like to pose to the panel, You may send these in using the Padlet QR code shown on the screen. I will now hand the time over to Professor Barker to lead the panel discussion on future-proofing Singapore to navigate climate challenges. Professor Barker, please.
Thank you. Yes, good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this part of the session. We have a panel session for the next 40 minutes or so before the break. And the topic is future-proofing Singapore to navigate climate challenges. And joining me on the panel today, we have four representatives from the Singapore climate community, 3 from agencies. So we have Ms. Hazel Koo, Director of Coastal Protection Department at PUB, Mr. Chew Wen Tong, who's Group Director of R&D at URA. We have Professor William Chen, Endowed Chair Professor in Food Science and Technology at NTU, and Dr. Karen Tun, Director of Coastal Marine at MPOX. So welcome everybody. We've got all of the areas of climate impacts, climate adaptation pretty much represented we've talked about here. Coastal protection, urban planning, food security, coastal marine, biodiversity, greenery, etc. So hopefully some good discussions. I'm sure some good discussions. So we'll spend about the first 20 minutes. We have a few questions that we want to just get the initial reactions, inputs from each of our panel members. And as mentioned, there is the Padlet discussion here. So the last 20 minutes, I really encourage you to submit your questions. And then we'll come to those questions the last 20 minutes or so. So, okay, so there we are. So to start with, perhaps Hazel, I can start with you. You've seen some of the initial results, and as you would have seen, it's a very, very brief overview of what is a very detailed study. So it'll take a lot of time to process in detail the results. I encourage you all to go off and look at the science report and the stakeholder report. But some initial highlights there on sea level rise, for example, somewhere between 0.25 and over 1 meter. What's your initial reactions and thoughts on the results so far, Hazel?
Okay, a quick answer to that question. I think we are prepared for different scenarios of sea level rise, and the V3 provides us with even more certainty of future climate scenarios that we can actually review our long-term planning. So it's beyond tackling sea level rise. I think as far as flood resilience, planning for our drainage infrastructure as well as water supply systems, PUB adopts a long-term approach to plan for some of our infrastructure. And therefore, the latest projections from the V3 will be very useful for us to review our long-term plans to ensure that climate change will be a factor that we consider in our long-term planning. So more specifically for sea level rise, we are aware that by the end of the century, sea level rise could rise up to about 1.15 meters. And that is exactly what PUB will use to incorporate into our coastal protection levels that is set so that we can all implement our coastal protection defenses to be ready for that eventuality. But having said that, we also want to take a more adaptive planning approach towards planning for sea level rise, because there are many different climate scenarios that we are looking at. So with that, we can formulate adaptation pathways with a planning horizon of up to 2 meters sea level rise, and that actually equips us with the possibility and flexibility to implement coastal protection measures that are required in the nearer term, and yet make plans and provisions for future adaptations if required. So in that sense, we will continue to monitor actual sea level rise, and if sea levels do exceed a certain threshold, then we will be able to put in place future enhancements. So this adaptive planning approach will help us to address the uncertainties in the different range of sea level rise that we expect in the future. So, but apart from mean sea level rise, the V3 also provides us with downscaled high-resolution wind speeds that can facilitate our further investigation in terms of how climate change and higher wind speeds can potentially impact coastal surge as well as waves events. And that is something that we will actually study. And when we use these projections and inputs together with our coastal inland flood model that we are currently developing, it will give us an updated insights on the flood risk arising from both rainfall as well as sea level rise. Yeah, so moving on to like impacts on rainfall, we have seen some of the high-level information from V3 that suggests that there will be more frequent and more intense rainfalls, and that is something that PUB will actually be reviewing to ensure that our ongoing efforts to enhance flood resilience will not be compromised. And for PUB, we adopt a source pathway receptor approach where we look at catchment-wide solutions. So when we coming out with solutions, we want to build flexibility and adaptability as well. So we do not only address like pathway solutions, and these are our drains and waterways where we convey our storm waters, but we also look at solutions at source where we can slow down the generation of rainfall, as well as solutions that are at our receptors, where we can implement localized interventions to prevent these areas from being flooded. And on the dry weather data that is presented, although the annual mean rainfall will increase, projections will increase, actually what is critical to us is that the dry spells will actually be longer and also more severe. And that calls for us to look at this data very seriously, to review our long-term plans, to incorporate these projections, to review our planning assumptions so that we can continue to develop plans to ensure a sustainable water supply for Singapore in the future.
Okay, thanks very much, Hazel, for that comprehensive view on the results and how you'll be using them at PUB. Wen Tung, over to you. Going back to some of the results, a lot of numbers in the table. I think the one that strikes me and struck several people is the heat, especially the wet bulb glow temperature, for example. Would you like to say a little about what struck you about the results and how URANers might be looking at heat resilience responses to the results?
I think as Aurel shared, the numbers the temperature is expected to go up anywhere from 0.5 to about 5 degrees. The number of heat stress days will also go up significantly. Even under the good scenarios, it's about 100 over days, and potentially even 300 days under the worst case scenario. Singapore has to look at how to be more heat resilient. So I think V3 is useful in giving us a lot of the background information of how the temperature is going to be, and I think we are doing quite a bit of research in how heat will impact Singapore and Singaporeans. So one of the projects, for example, is with Singapore ETH and SMU. So Prof. Winston Chow is one of the DPIs for that, studying how the heat will impact us, and then what we need to do in terms of planning and design to help mitigate the heat. I think Singapore, we are also trialing many cooling solutions. So this range from having more greenery, which potentially can lower nearby temperatures by anywhere 0.9 degrees or something. We're also trialing things like cool paints, which can lower potentially the temperature of the buildings by about 2 degrees. And we're also integrating climate-sensitive design into our planning as well as our design. For example, we are integrating a lot of some of this modeling and some of these requirements into new districts where we can try to increase the wind speeds as well as have more shade provision. So this will all help keep Singapore cool. I think, and finally, I think we have to help the community and the residents all become more heat resilient. So I think last year, NEA launched the heat stress advisory under the My ENV app, and I think that gives more information out to the public for them to manage themselves in terms of the tire, in terms of activity, in terms of hydration, so that we collectively we can all become more heat resilient. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Professor Chen, would you like to say a little about what struck you in the applications of food security and resilience?
First of all, I see that the increase in the temperature actually is not just affecting our general population, the health, but also affect the crop yield. So, we are already seeing a lot of disruptions on this food supply from regional countries, and that is a reflection of the impact of this global warming on the food production. But we also have to see that this impact on food production is actually related to the overly simplistic way of our demand for food production. For example, we talk about the global population reaching 10 billion by 2050, and then the simplest way is to let's clear more land, let's clear more forests to make land for farming. In a way, along the way, we actually remove a lot of carbon sink and leading to global warming. Then this vicious cycle. Then in the end, we have not enough food and so on. But I think moving forward, the first thing we need to do is to improve the current food system. And by doing so, we can reduce food waste, food loss, and then enhance the production efficiency of the food production. And in response to this global warming, I think Singapore government has pushed out this 30 by 30 initiative that will enhance local food production capacities. And this is actually an effort that required the entire community to support. We are seeing that for certain category, we are achieving a reasonable level of production, but we need consumer to support, and also F&B sector to support. So looking at these food security issues, we actually need to have two approaches. One is proactive, the second one is the reactive. So in response, we have the 30 by 30, but moving forward, we need to have innovations to sort of enhance the current food production system. So only when we combine these two, I think we will achieve better food security.
Thank you. Karen, so on the biodiversity, greenery, I mean, I guess all of the parameters we study here impact, right? The winds, relatively modest change, perhaps, relative to some of the other changes in heat, for example, but tree resilience, the survival of particular species that have grown here for hundreds of years may be coming to an end, perhaps, if we look at some of the studies. What are the results that strike you from this, and how do you see your agency dealing with some of these impacts and results?
Thank you, Dale. Maybe I'll just like to start by congratulating CCRS and NEA on a fantastic job done with V3. I think it provides the kind of data that we need to better understand what's happening in the environment so that we can find solutions. I think we are now moving towards finding solutions, and this really sets the standard for us to work on. But taking that to the next step, when you talk about greenery and biodiversity, climate change will impact biodiversity, land and sea, urban and natural. And what we're trying to do now is to understand how this translates to responses so that we can find solutions. Climate change is not new. We had V2 that gave us some information. So I think at NParks, We have worked on data that's been available before to try to find solutions to better manage our, particularly urban greenery. It's the first interface, it's what people see. You know, when you're out in the streets, you see the trees in your parks, in your gardens. Singapore is a green city, and rightfully so, we need it for cooling. But all the amenities that they can also provide disamenities when there's a massive storm and a tree falls. So we need to be able to understand how climate change can impact something that is so essential for Singapore, and how do we prevent that from becoming a liability. And as you would see, I'm not sure whether some of y'all noticed towards the end of last year, about October, November, some of our trees became bald, right? You know, you start seeing the pruning that goes on. And that's purposeful. It's not because we don't like trees and we are cutting them down indiscriminately, but data show that when trees grow to a certain size and you're getting wind speeds of a certain level, they will start to become vulnerable and they might fall. So we cut them, we prune them to certain levels to hedge for any potential events. And what V3 then will do is provide the kind of data that will help us to refine some of these models that we are using, so that we can then know where do we prune the trees, what trees should be pruned, how much should they be pruned, at what time of the year, so that they do not become a disamenity to the people. I think this is something that we'll need to keep on enhancing as data becomes available. The other thing that we're also doing is also changing the way we plant. So if you'll notice, I think Singapore is very familiar. You land on Changi Airport, you take that East Coast pathway, beautiful rain trees, bougainvilleas at the bottom. Iconic, we love that. But if you notice, almost every other roads, highways that you go, it doesn't follow that typology anymore. And there's a purposeful reason for doing that, because data shows that when you have just a single type of typology, you increase the risk. So what we have been doing now, as you would see in many of the roads, we have multi-tiered layering. It looks like a forest, but in a linear fashion. Data shows us that by diversifying the way we plant, that increases resilience. Again, what V3 will do is help us to then better predict what kind of trees might be useful to ensure that we can provide us with the kind of shade or amenities that we need without providing us with the disamenities that come with it. So that's the urban side of the story. When you talk about the natural environment, you talk about your nature reserves, your plants and animals, research is currently ongoing. Again, the research looks at responses. How will they respond to, say, extreme dryness, extreme wet? We don't have the answers yet. So this will become very useful to help us understand it, help researchers use the data, like you say, basically the baseline data that's required to do the experiments and to run the model. So very excited about the results from this. Maybe I could just add, moving forward, and I'm sure V3 is not going to be a static, endeavor. There will be other studies that will come online, and maybe a bit more studies on predicting changes in the marine environment, looking at sea surface temperatures, looking at ocean acidification. So combine understanding what's happening on land and what's happening in the sea will help us to find the solutions that we need to tackle climate change. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. So thanks for all your responses. I want to move on to a separate topic now, which is how we can all respond. I mean, again, these results are not static. You know, we look at different scenarios because frequently the biggest uncertainty or the biggest unknown here is how we're going to respond to the crisis of existential crisis of climate change. So we all must play our part as individuals, as nations, as the worldwide network. So, but let's start with perhaps you, William. I mean, in terms of what should we be doing as individuals, organisations? What can we be doing to try and move things in the right direction? These are just scenarios. These aren't. None of this is reality yet. So what could we be doing? A general question, but maybe have particular thoughts on who's responsible and what can we do as individuals or companies, etc.
Well, well, my sense is that it should be a collective effort. It's not just about government. It's not just about innovation. It's not just about industry or consumers. It's really a collective effort. So, for example, when we talk about tightening the current food system, we're talking about creating a circular model through which we first should understand what is defined as a basic nutrition requirement. Then these will impact on the production yield make the entire food system more efficient. I think this is a missing in the traditional farming system, and I think 30 by 30 actually address this critical point in years to come. And talking about the consumers' support for locally produced food, I would say that it's about mindset change. I just came back from Japan. When we talk about food processing side stream like okra, soybean residues, here we treat it like waste. But in Japan, actually, it can be made as a delicacy. It tastes very good, actually. So it's about perception change. Why I mention this is because when we talk about cultivated meat or insect-derived protein, I don't think local consumer would have a very high level of buy-in. But then it's all about perception that we ought to be aware of this impact on the food supply. We should be more open to new source of food sources, right? And by mentioning this urban solution just now, I think there are not just one of the issues about the urban food production system is high cost, but we know that we also can rely on nature-based solution. Like sometimes we talk about a mushroom, for example. This require very low level energy compared to other type of vegetables, for example, and also insect farming. That also all these are options for us to consider to make our urban solution more efficient and at the same time educate consumers so that we can actually achieve a higher level of options for consumers to choose from and enhance our local food security.
Okay, thanks, William. So, of course, we've known about climate change for a long time. V3 is the latest, greatest iteration of the data localized for Singapore and the Southeast Asia region. Hazel, maybe I can ask you in terms of, is there anything that you feel you're already doing or you feel you might want to be doing more of as an individual or as an organization in response to these results? Or what would you suggest we do?
Yeah, so I think in line with your earlier question, how can individuals, communities, and even businesses be involved in this? I've earlier shared a lot about what PUB is doing, in terms of long-term planning and trying to implement some of these long-term adaptation measures. But I think there is a role for everyone, to be involved in this. And I think, despite investing substantially in adaptation measures, there's no way, like for example, in drainage infrastructure, there's no way we can be totally immune of occasional flash floods because of climate change. While we can design for, to cater for the most extreme events, but that will require a lot of precious land take as well as high financial investments. So I think we will have to address climate change collectively. So in this sense, we want to provide some of this information to the public, of impending flood risk when there is a heavy rain warning. And this is exactly what PUB is doing. So we will provide through various channels, like our social media, telegrams, platforms, as well as the radio, the MyENE app, so that this real-time information can go to the people, to the community, that people can be empowered to make decisions on their commuting decisions, where they want to go to, and for others, to avoid places that could potentially have flood risk. And these are ways that individuals, the community, can be involved. And for today, although for PUB, we have already reduced, flood-prone areas from 3,200 hectares to 30 hectares, there are still areas which are low-lying and flood-prone. So for residences and for businesses located here, I think that PUB has been also working with them very closely to educate them on the possible ways to protect them from flood risk. And we also loan flood devices, flood protection devices like inflatable sandbags, as well as portable flood barriers. And this can be easily deployed, when we expect, a flooding to happen. And beyond that, I think for developments, for new developments, for installations, we have been giving requirements like on how you can actually design your premises to be more flood resilient, to incorporate crests, to basements as well as to underground spaces, or even elevating some of your critical M&E equipment so that they are not vulnerable to flooding. So these are some of the ways, I can't possibly, give all the examples. One of the ways that individuals, businesses, communities that can actually be involved. And I think another dimension, as what Minister has said, is that for coastal protection, because it is such a long-term as well as complex undertaking that will involve the reshaping of our coastlines, I think that's where we have the opportunity to invite the community, professionals, the industry to come on board together with us to co-create some of these solutions. And last year, we have organized ideas competition for students from the local institutes to showcase some of their ideas for coastal protection when applied to the southeastern part, the coast of Singapore. And from the winning entries, we see that it demonstrates such creativity in proposing integrated solutions that complement with the land users. But I think what is even more intriguing from this is that the ideas actually reflect the aspirations of our youths for what our future coastlines may look like. So apart from the ideas competition, we also want to get everyone on board to participate in the co-development of solutions, and that's why we have launched our Coastal Conversations. These are series of dialogue sessions, where different diverse group of stakeholders can come to share their views, their thoughts, and exchange ideas on what are some of the potential solutions for coastal protection, what are some of the trade-offs. And while we acknowledge that there is no one solution that can potentially meet all our needs, but what excites us is really the opportunity to look forward towards multifunctional coastlines that can bring greater value, and that is only possible with early planning. So I think there are many ways. I haven't even talked about, water efficiency, managing the demand. We can go on and on, but I should hand over the time back to you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We've got literally 50, 60 questions in, so we really want to get to those. Wen Tung, do you have a quick word on this? Less than a minute on the...
Okay. I would say for heat, I think we need to work together with academia and the industry to really do the research, as well as to try out the new solutions, whether it's include or cool paints or climate-sensitive design. And I think the video talked about what us individually can do to lower our carbon footprint, but I'll just talk a bit about air conditioning, because it not just lowers the carbon footprint, but for air conditioning, actually, you eject heat into the environment. So you're actually causing the nearby environment to get hotter. So I think studies have shown that you can, if you have air conditioning, your nearby temperature actually goes up by about 1 degree. So if we can all minimize our use of air conditioning or just set the temperature higher, that will help.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks all for those questions. So I want to go to the questions. Thanks very much for all your questions. We're not going to have a chance to get through them all in the next 15, 20 minutes. But let me take a couple of them here. Okay, so there are a few questions quite a few questions on the details of differences between V2 and V3, and some of the details. In terms of V2 and V3, if you remember, V2 was around 2015, V3 2023, 2024. That's about 8 years, and in that time, we've had another generation of global CMIP6 global models that Aurel showed earlier. We've used those, the latest global models. We've also, as we mentioned, we've got the new regional model, which we use as CCRS. Just point out, these models take years to develop, so we're already thinking about what the next V4 might look like, and the kind of science questions and engaging with the users about what's missing, what do we need for the next one. But that activity for our regional climate model started 10 years ago. So this is a decadal activity. We don't do this too often. We want to do it right. We want to do it where there's a big improvement. There's a question about green computing in here, and I do want to address that one because you want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. I think one thing I will say in terms of V3, the computational efficiency of the models has increased drastically over the past 5 to 10 years. But it's still, certainly in Singapore, it's still very much a fossil fuel-based energy supply at NSEC. We've been talking to NSEC, we talked to our international partners, how we might tap into international supercomputing resources, international test beds, where we can make use of renewable energy to provide our energy for all our science, all our climate science in particular. Got to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So I think certainly in V4, we'll be looking at hopefully 100% renewable energy. So there will be no carbon footprint for V4. Okay, so moving on to some of the other questions. We've talked some about the adaptation activities. How will Singapore ensure that we do not follow the SSP emissions pathway? Well, we've talked about, again, this is in our hands, right? This is not a done deal. So I think we've talked about some of the things that we need to be doing as individuals, as governments, etc. Okay, so we don't necessarily need to talk too much about that. Right, where should we start? Impact of warmer weather on biodiversity. Karen, maybe I can ask you, while we can try to, stay there. While we can try to improve our urban infrastructure to cope with the warming climate, are there ideas on how we can protect our flora and fauna, which will be even more exposed to the elements? Karen, you want to take that one?
We will do that, yeah. Thanks for the question. The same question that we ask ourselves at NParks, what can we do to protect flora and fauna? And I think to answer that question, we must actually understand how will climate change impact them? How will it impact their biology? How will it impact the ecology? And to do that, we need the research. We need the science to support decision. And that's where, again, V3 comes in, as well as the research program coming out of this that will help us understand some of this. So just to share, NParks has put in a couple of proposals that will be looking at how the various changes in the weather patterns will impact biodiversity, both the urban as well as the natural systems. Just one example to give, when you have extreme dries and extreme wets, that really impacts the way, say, tree health would be determined. You get a lot of water, it becomes waterlogged, so you can get tree rot. But if it's very dry, then it dries up, and that actually impacts the stability of the tree. Now we need to understand that, and we need to understand how can we then mitigate against that. What are the strategies that you can adopt? Because we can't change some of the things, but we can find ways that maybe the plant will adapt better to warmer climates or wetter climates. That science still needs to be done, and that science is currently being done through various research projects. So that's the land side. For the marine side, we have the Marine Climate Change Science Program that was announced 2 years ago. The projects are just starting now, and that again will guide us on how to find solutions on impacts to biodiversity. So we know, for example, increasing sea surface temperatures are going to be causing mass coral bleaching. And corals are keystone organisms on a reef. You destroy corals, you destroy the reef, and you destroy everything else that's on the reef. So that's important to understand. So if we can understand how climate change, sea surface temperatures impact the corals, and we can then protect the corals, there's a good chance we can protect the other biodiversity that depends on the corals. So we need to be creative in the way we think about finding solutions, find the solutions that can perhaps serve multiple purposes. So those are the kind of research that's currently being done, and our academic partners play an immense role in finding those answers that we need.
Thanks, Karen. So just maybe a few questions and a few quick replies from maybe Hazel. I've got one. There's a question here on storm surges, and I know it's early days. V3 itself does not provide projections of storm surges, but would you like to just very briefly, in a minute, just say what your plans are in terms of looking at the frequency of storm surges?
Yeah, so V3 will actually provide accessibility to latest data on winds and that is what we will be investigating in our coastal protection and flood management research program under CFI Singapore. So we will be taking the inputs from V3 and then evaluating if there is any impact on the extremities of coastal surge events, as well as how it would actually impact waves. And that is something that we are very interested in, and how we will actually be carrying out research and further study on.
Thank you, Hazel. So William, a question here on plant-based diet. Are there any plans to encourage a plant-based diet which will decrease the resource intensity of our food production?
Okay, this is not an easy question to answer. We have seen that in the space of promoting alternative foods, plant-based meat is not doing so well. I mean, in reality, it's not doing so well because I think we are making the life too complicated. When we talk about plant-based protein, just keep it as it is instead of saying meat, right? Then when you talk about meat, people start to compare. It's never ending. It will never taste like meat. So it's like then along the way we include so many ingredients to make it look like meat, taste like meat, and then consumer will perceive this as a hyper-processed food. So it's a no-go. So I think when we push for a diversity of food options, just keep it as a new options, plant-based protein as it is. So in that case, under this scenario, I think we would have a higher buy-in from consumers. But moving forward, in terms of enhancing the urban solutions for food production, we are actually working with Singapore Food Agency and National Research Foundation to take a systems approach rather than looking at individual innovations, be it energy or be it plant science. So we're taking a system approach to enhance efficiency, lower the cost, enhance energy efficiency, water usage efficiency, and zero waste for this urban solution. And only then I think urban solution would be cost effective. And we can also look into how to enhance the nutrition value of the urban solution, because ultimately when we talk about 30 by 30, it's about quality over quantity. So this is, I think, the way moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So there's a question here on the marine side again, impact of climate on marine. Will future iterations of V3 take into account its impact on marine waters and ocean acidification? I think, Karen, you did touch on that, but I think it is important to say that there is more work to be done here. So in terms of the marine, it's really about sea level rise in V3, but ocean acidification, the impact of oceans on ocean circulation, salinity, etc., biogeochemistry, etc. Again, more work to be done in those areas. So I think certainly we're thinking about that, and there are models out there that can model that kind of stuff, but that's not part of V3, but certainly part of the downstream V3 plus, as it's loosely known, or even V4 would be part of that. There's a question here, Wentong, I don't know if it's helpful for you. There's quite a few here on this, again, the wet bulb globe temperature. I mean, when we get to a stage where, again, these are maximum sort of worst case scenarios where you see the high wet bulb globe temperature heat stress is in all of the scenarios actually going from about 10 days per year up to around 300 to 360. Is there anything, to me that's the one, again, maybe perhaps with our cooling Singapore strategies we have hope that we can do something about this. Would you like to just say a little bit more on that one before we wrap up?
Okay, I think Singapore, we've always been living with heat. So we are a tropical island, so our base temperature is high. And then with urbanization, there will be the urban heat island effect. And then with climate change, you add on another 0.5 to 5 degrees, as Aurel said. So I think we have always been living with heat. But I think the V3 basically, I think, highlights the urgency for us to do more. And so things like how to improve our climate-sensitive design, how to introduce new materials like cool paints or cool films, etc. I think we have to scale up faster and do things faster. And I would also say I think we all need to be more aware of heat resilience. I think in the past, I mean, we don't play soccer in noontime in the open when the sun is bright. So, but increasingly, there will be more requirements to look after ourselves. So I think when ENV launched the heat advisory, I think there's also a requirement for employers to monitor the heat for outdoor workers. SCF have been doing that for years. So increasingly, I think we have to be more conscious and have to look after ourselves more. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Wen-Tong. So I think that brings us to the end of the panel session. So thank you, everybody, for all your questions. Of course, we didn't get through all of them by any means, but we have a break now, I believe. So perhaps if you have specific burning questions, you can catch one of us or others in the room who'll be able to answer your questions. But with that, we'll conclude the first panel session, and thank you to all the panel members.
Thank you, Professor Barker and panelists, for a very interesting discussion. May I invite the panel to please remain seated on stage for a photo, please. Thank you, panelists. We will now adjourn for a 15-minute break. May I invite Minister, Chairman, and CEO to make your way to the refreshments area directly outside the room, please. For the rest of the audience, refreshments will be served directly outside the room to the back of the room, and feel free to scan the QR codes on the screen during the break for more information on V3 and the Data Visualization Portal. Following the break, we will have a second panel discussion on society's role in global change. You may pose your questions using the Padlet QR code on the screen. Please enjoy the break. The next segment of our program will begin at 11:20 a.m. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we will be commencing the next segment of our program shortly. Please kindly take your seats and switch your mobile devices to silent mode. Thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We hope you enjoyed the refreshments over the break and had the opportunity to learn more about V3 and the Data Visualization Portal. Our next panel discussion will discuss society's role in global change and climate action post-COP28. The panel will be moderated by the co-chair of IPCC Working Group 2, Professor Winston Chow. May I invite Professor Chow on stage alongside our panelists. Professor Koh Lian Pin, Associate Vice President and Chief Sustainability Scientist at the National University of Singapore. Ms. Esther An, Chief Sustainability Officer at City Developments Limited. Ms. Kong Man Jing, or MJ, co-founder and host of Science Channel Just Keep Thinking. And Ms. Elaine Tan, Director for Research at the Center for Livable Cities.
You can sit here. Yeah, we'll sit behind the nice.
I will now hand the time over to Professor Chow to lead the panel discussion. As before, you may pose your questions to the panel via the Padlet QR code shown on the screen. Professor Chow, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I hope you all had a good break, as well as take the opportunity to network and discuss the very interesting and important findings that the V3 team has presented and showcased this morning. On that note, actually, I think on behalf of our panelists, we'd like to congratulate the team that was responsible for the release of the results. It's an important milestone. I know how much work has been involved in developing the V3 product, and I think I'll speak also on behalf of a lot of researchers and other stakeholders. We'd like to get our hands on the data, and that data visualization portal is rather essential for informing and communicating those aspects. And given that I think Prof. Koh and myself, we communicate a lot with our students, that would be a very fantastic portal to inform the next generation of scholars and students about the importance of climate information, especially relevant climate information in the Singapore and Southeast Asian context. So to start, Minister has already said this is a very important tool because it is in the context of the pivotal decade of climate action that's required. And V3, as we know, informs and guides the action that will take place between now and the next important set of climate-related milestones, 2030, 2050 and beyond. Just last month, this very esteemed panel, as well as several other people in this room, we had the privilege of attending the Climate Conference of Parties 28, COP28 in Dubai. We've seen how relevant science results helps to inform policy, and it also has numerous societal impacts. So with that, it feeds back upon itself. So the decisions that were made during COP28 will have important ramifications going forward that will affect every aspect of society globally, not just in Singapore and Southeast Asia. So given our expertise here on the panel, I'd like to leverage that, given the participation that all 5 of us and others have in Dubai. We'll try and inform the discussion that we have in this panel. And I have 2 broad questions before we go into the questions that we hope we will try and engage with the Padlet that we have. So please feel free to use the QR codes. I know that Dale's previous panel, there were 60 questions. Let's see if we can break that record for this panel. So I have 2 questions first. This is addressed to the entire panel. We've heard from the previous panel about what the government has done and what they're planning to do. It's very heartening to note that we're not unprepared for the, shall we say, climate slings and arrows and impacts that will come our way. I don't want to touch upon the very good and rich content that was discussed before the break, but I would like to ask the panelists here, what are the 2 key takeaways from the release of the V3 results, as well as from this morning's discussion, that you would like to highlight based on your area of expertise? So if I could invite Prof. Koh first. I mean, he's the expert on sustainability, one of the key experts on sustainability here in Singapore and the region. What aspects of the V3 results release would you like to highlight? 2 aspects. Over to you.
Thanks, Winston. Very good morning. Good morning, everyone. And also, I'd like to echo what Winston mentioned earlier in congratulating both Dale and Aurel and their team for the massive work that they have done over the past years to produce this important body of outcomes or results. That's very important for a lot of us, both in academia, but also more importantly in the public and private sectors. Maybe I'll answer that question slightly differently from how it was asked, linking it back to something else Winston mentioned, which is COP28. One of the observations that I've had, and I think many of us who attended COP28 had, was the fact that there was comparatively a lack of representation from Southeast Asia, from our region. And so in relation to that, I think what V3 could also achieve beyond the good work and outcomes and insights that it has delivered for Singapore is to broaden its lens a bit to look at the region as a whole, both in terms of the impacts of climate change on various sectors in the region, the knock-on impacts of climate change, and also the impacts on society, on biodiversity, on nature, and so on. One important aspect of that that we are beginning to get more interested in is the issue of food security. As was mentioned in the previous panel as well, we do have the 30 by 30 goal, but even if we achieve that, we still have to think about what to do with the 70% of our nutritional needs. And to a large extent, I think a lot of that would be coming from imports, perhaps mainly from the region, but also beyond the region as well. So there's a lot of need for us to have a good understanding of how climate change will affect food production, food supply, food resiliency in the region, and also beyond the region. And sometimes the impacts of climate change on food production can be quite insidious. It's not immediately intuitive or obvious, and it could be quite variable across different food-producing regions. So there's a lot of need for us to have a better understanding. And there's also the time component to that, how things will change over time. The impacts might be different over different periods over the next few decades. So those are important insights that I think we have the capability through V3 and perhaps V3 Plus or even V4 to give some data or insights in that regards. So that's one. So the first point is to have a broader lens, maybe looking at the regional level in terms of impacts and opportunities. Then the second point that I have is with regards to, or wish that I have, is with regards to getting a better understanding of the delta of our actions. I think a lot of the focus has been on the impacts of climate change, necessarily, so that is the top priority for us. In addition to that, again, maybe in V3 Plus or V4, we could also have some understanding or some investment in improving our understanding of the delta of our actions. Now, when we are able to transition from ICE vehicles to EVs by 2040, what could that delta mean in terms of the outcomes that we have been hearing about? And many of the other actions that we are beginning to put in place and policies that we're beginning to put in place. I think having an understanding of the delta will also help us understand whether we are doing enough, whether we need to do more, and also answering those questions for the region too.
Good answers, Prof. Koh. I liked how you brought those 2 points together, the broader lens from the V3 product as well as the change or the delta in the resulting actions that we hope to take with this enhanced information. Moving on to Elaine. You've done a lot of great work with the Center for Livable Cities on directing research there. You've engaged a lot with societal concerns, community concerns for climate action. What's your 2 takeaways based on the V3 results being released today?
Yeah, I think the 2 key takeaways I have is that, before I go into that, I must congratulate Dr. Aurel as well and his team on the final grain resolution that we have regarding our climate change challenge. And I think that is extremely important because given the fact that now we have more data, we're able to understand how climate change is no longer just a very high-level, lofty concept, but how does it affect directly the livability of everybody in their everyday lives and every person on the street. So because of that, I think it's important to understand even simple things like if, according to the V3 results that we saw, and it was very impressive, saying things about how it's going to get wetter and there are more heat stress. And then we need to understand what can we do in the built environment level to improve situation for people every day, just going to, say, the bus stop or the train station. So maybe if I could just share a very quick example that probably wasn't mentioned earlier with our other government agency representatives. So for instance, the Land Transport Authority, LTA. LTA has a master plan for 2040, and that includes things as simple as having sheltered walkways, so that you can get to your bus stop and train station. 8 in 10 families will be within a transport node or bus stop. And these sheltered walkways, for instance, are no mean feat. The fact that since 2018, we have already saw this coming and have built over 200 kilometers of such sheltered linkways, and to build another 150 kilometers of this linkway by 2040. So these are the things that we need to do to improve and continue to maintain or improve the livability of our everyday. But that's it. The second thing I had a key takeaway from that is that I start to think, is the challenge very immense? And no one person or one sector can deal with the issue. And so then we need to take on a systems approach to things and look at it from not just whole of government or whole of industry, but a whole of society point of view. And we need to understand that in this whole of society point of view, the community is at the core of this issue. Because one thing we can understand is that when a crisis hits, it is the community that gets together to mobilize collective action before formal channels of aid can reach them. So that is the importance of community resilience. And a truly resilient city or country to such challenges like climate change is not just about the infrastructure, that is hardware resilience, but it's also about the software and the human resilience of things. And that coming together forms a truly resilient a city or society. So those are my two key takeaways drawing from that presentation.
Thanks, Elaine. I like that. The making it personal, bringing it down. We know the importance of downscaling, the increasing granularity for models, but also climate change requires the heart rather than the hardware, and bring it to the personal level, the lived experience, the livability aspect that is oftentimes omitted, but it's important to see how that information links into making the lived experience a better one. And shorter walkways, yeah, big up for that. Definitely important. Moving on to MJ. You've done a lot of good work on communicating. I mean, when in Dubai, your Instagram views were very popular and very informative. But you also represent the importance of youth. And I would like to ask your two takeaways on either or on both, up to you to decide. What do you think should be highlighted based on the release of today's results?
Thank you, Prof. Chow, especially for the great introduction, and also congratulations to NEA and MSS. I mean, I heard both panelists congratulate us. Okay, I also have to congratulate already. Yeah. So when I first see the results, right, as a youth and thinking from a youth perspective, the question that comes to mind is, what does this information got to do with me? What can I do with this information as a youth, right? I know that sea levels are rising, temperatures are rising. What am I going to do about it? So I think that a lot of youths can resonate with me as well, because we are not in a position where we can perhaps, or at least that's what we think, right? We cannot make big changes, we cannot have that much of an impact. So the two key takeaways is related to this question that I had in mind. First of all, when I speak to youths and I ask them, what are your concerns when it comes to climate change? Which aspect of climate change are you most concerned with? Everyone gives different answers. And it has to do with a lot with what their background is, where their passion lies, if they're young working adults, what they're working as. So some may be more interested in education, social sustainability, biodiversity, the finance sector. So you have this varied answer, but that also shows that a lot of the youths, we kind of see things through our own lens, and we are very fixated on that one aspect of climate change, and we don't see how everything is interconnected. We don't see how other factors actually affects the issue that they want to resolve. And when they just keep fixating on that one particular issue, they get very frustrated. It's like, why cannot this decision be made? Why can't we do things in another way? And they don't see the broader perspectives of things. So I think that's where youth programs such as OSLP, CYDP, bringing youth to COP actually is really, really helpful for them, because they get to understand the economic side of things, the finance side of things, the transport side of things. And I think that's very important to shape their views, and it's important for them to grow as a person also, especially if they are going to be more engaged with the government, giving feedback, because passion without substantiated knowledge and evidence, right? Nothing is going to move. You're not going to give very constructive feedback that can be useful to the agencies involved. But if you can give constructive feedback, that's where I think we can really move the needle and work together with the community. So that's one key takeaway. And also the second key takeaway for me is how can we build a more conducive environment to really nurture youths into sustainability leaders. So there's definitely a group of youths who are very passionate, and they'll go out of their way, committing their time and effort to contribute as much as they can. And just want to shout out to Lei Park in SG here, Sika, SYVB, Xiang Tian, Qin, you guys are one of the most amazing people I've met, and you guys inspire me every day. But there's also a larger group of youths that maybe they are a little bit passionate, they do care about climate issues, but they have not reached that level yet. Not as passionate, not as motivated, and that's totally fine, right? We are all not in that level. How do we actually create an environment that will spur them on and give them that little push that they need? Yes, so I think that lies a lot with our education system, number one, integrating sustainability concepts from a young age into their curriculum so that they can foster a deeper understanding of the planet and instill their responsibility to, save the world. And also, secondly, to have effective youth programs. I do see a lot of youth programs in recent years where, those hackathons where the youths participate. But whether these programs are actually effective or not, that's like another question. Yeah, so some youths tell me like they see it as a CCA, and afterwards they don't see any follow-up. So to them, they just join and then they just leave. So how can we actually create more effective youth programs that actually help them in the long run? And last but not least, also to show that sustainability, a career in sustainability, is attractive. You'll be surprised, some people do feel that there's no future being in this field. They see the tech industry that's more attractive and there's more ownership there. So there are youths that do feel that there's no future investing their time and effort into sustainability industry. And like when you want to do sustainability, you have to join MSc. But that's not true. You can join MTI and do CCS technologies. You can join MAS and do green finance. You can become a scientist. There's sustainability in every aspect of the work that we do. And we need to show youth that these are all possible, open up career pathways and guide them accordingly, have mentorship programs, so that we can partner leaders in the field with passionate youths, and basically make sustainability sexy again.
Okay, that's a good slogan there, MJ. Yeah. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Good points. I loved how you raised the variety of views from the youths and the energy, because they are already old enough, I can say. They're forward-looking in terms of the future, and that has to be leveraged to build an important community. And in some ways, the educational tweaks that might be needed, with better information from V3 or from the experiences from this panel and from everybody else in this room might be useful towards that end. Before we go to Esther, I've noticed that I need to chide the room. You've only given me about 25 questions, maybe a bit more from the pad, that would be good. But also, without you guys actually seeing the questions, you've already addressed some of the questions that have been raised pertaining to school-level engagement, pertaining to building communities in a systemic fashion, harnessing their power. And one of those other questions, which I think will be covered by our next panelist, is on how the V3 data will be used by businesses. And here I would like to invite Esther, who is young at heart. I've always looked up to you because of the energy you provided, because you've seen it all. And yet you've maintained that high level of passion towards climate action. And yes, you are here to tell us about what do you think industry, what do you think businesses, what do you think, can you allay the concerns of MJ, like there is no future for jobs in sustainability? 2 points,
Happy
please.
New Year to everyone first, and this is my very first panel. And climate action is really a team game. And we have interface, as a business, we have interface with policymakers, international leaders, and down the value chain, from land seller, as a builders. We also with contractors, subcontractors, and workers, and building users. People spend 90% indoors, so everyone here, you have something to do with real estate, and you have an impact on real estate. So just now, thanks for the scientists' hard work that, the data are very clear. And we have heard all these, so-called warning and data for many years already. So now it's really, time for action. And of course, at COP, this is my 4th COP, and I really see that this COP really reach out to a wider and more inclusive, audience, and also see the urgency as well. Well, there's always, 2 sides to every coin. We are not here to discuss how the impact is, but at least they bring alive, keep alive the conversation of net zero, of engaging a larger stakeholders and ecosystems to take action. And what I like this COP, and also actually quite aligned with what Singapore Green Plan is very down to earth. is really impacting everybody's daily life. And well, they really cover like sustainable fashion, food, and even women and youth as well. And this year, youth activities, they were very, very active, running around like crazy. And of course, businesses have been really pushed to the forefront. And I would say that actually it's since Glasgow, COP26, you have seen that, climate finance, transitional finance, all these are in the forefront, and the formation of GFANs and financial sector are the key driver. Every business needs financial support and resource. As businesses, we feel that we have the network, we have the resource, and we have, really the abilities to mobilize capital as well as technology, innovation, and definitely sustainability has very good career path, not just joining the government sector. Private sector need a lot of people who are not just good with science, math, economy, but also with innovation, technology. Just give one example, heat, which is really very important. We are next to the equator. What can we expect, right? So I think we need to think innovatively, even like changing the working hours, because you can avoid the hottest hours in a day and change it to, the less, invasive, heat in the evening. So there are a lot of things we can pivot, but it needs multiple agency, to change the stop work, at certain hour. We can extend it and let the worker, because construction is no joke. They're always outdoor. And we need to look at the well-being of workers, and we also need to look at productivities. All the data that you show has very high economic impact. Pardon me that I'm a business, sector. We have to look at economy. If Singapore does not take urgent action enough, it will affect the value, the investment value, the land cost, the asset property cost of the country. So I think this has a lot of economic impact as well. So how we design, build, manage infrastructure, and also engage our stakeholder, be it home buyers, tenants, and also our contractor, subcontractor, sustainable building materials, sustainable building practices. There are a lot of that. One last thing is about governance, sustainability reporting, which is a key agenda since COP26 Glasgow. They actually has brought sustainability reporting to the mainstream agenda, because without measuring, you can't manage. And for Singapore, we have the Sustainability Reporting Advisory Committee, and we have our recommendation, and we took a very proactive and bold stance, not just engaging the listed companies to report on ESG performance. ESG is environment, social, and governance, but also recommending non-listed company, the large boy, to really come up to set target, track performance, and report their ESG, because to help Singapore to achieve net zero and all the climate ambition, you can't rely on just listed company. Yeah.
Thanks, Esther. I like how you actually jumped the gun, because we're going to talk about COP28 next. But I noticed that you brought two important points. One is it's a team game. We can't just do it alone. You need that whole, it reinforces the point that Elaine made about systemic change within Singapore and elsewhere. But also the heat example is very good. With the information provided by V3, we know that, okay, those the work stop programs may have to change with the higher levels of extreme WBGT days or thermally uncomfortable days as well. So that is important information to act upon towards the end of sustainability, which you very nicely elaborated on. Okay, so that's for the V3 side, but I want to take the opportunity. Not every day that you have a panel of experts who all went to COP28 and contributed significantly there. I want to bring that discussion to how it was a very interesting experience. Personally, I enjoyed it a lot, and some very interesting talking points was that it was the largest COP. More than 100,000 total participants were involved in the negotiations, more than double of that in Sharm el-Sheikh, and about I think in Glasgow it's only 33,000. So you're looking at a huge increase in recent times. It tells you there is immense and strong interest towards generating good outcomes for climate action. you can look into anything that's been reported in the news. There is a takeaway for anyone, regardless of background, businesses, NGOs, negotiating parties, so on and so forth. The point is that even though it was a bit lengthy, even though it was a bit inefficient, the point is that these sort of multilateral arrangements, agreements that are informed by the best available scientific research, such as those provided by V3 and V3+, it leads to good action, for better or worse. For better or worse, this sort of multilateral agreements is the only viable way forward towards keeping the Paris Agreement goals of 1.5 degrees C in mind. So the big takeaway for me is that the encouraging thing is that it goes beyond just a government-only or business-only or science-only issue, as it was in the early days of negotiations. Now it's clear it's an issue affecting everyone, and a lot of the panelists have pointed that out. It's no longer somebody else's business, it's our business. But that's my takeaway, and I would like to take the time to ask the panelists, what's your biggest takeaway? One single takeaway or one single lesson from COP28? And how can it align with what the V3 release or what the Green Plan has done in Singapore, and try and mix those two together with that sort of frame in mind. Okay, so what's that big takeaway that you have? I'll start with Prof. Koh again, Yemping.
Yeah, thanks, Winston. Maybe I'll try to be brief and squeeze in two takeaways, if I can. So the first one is about the content. I think I was very heartened that nature continues to be featured. In fact, it's having a growing prominence in COP. The last COP28 was my second COP, and I was at Sharm el-Sheikh as well in COP27. And even then at COP27, nature-based solutions was gaining prominence, and it became even more important, I think, in the last one in COP28. The other substantive content-related insight that I have, or observation that I have, is the feature or emphasis on ocean-related actions, climate actions. That's also very important, and especially for a country like Singapore. We are in a very archipelagic region. We are a maritime nation. So are many of our neighboring countries. So the fact that ocean is gaining prominence in terms of how climate is impacting our oceans and the role of oceans in both mitigating and adapting in our mitigation and adaptation efforts towards climate change is important. And it's good that these things are getting more recognized. So those are the two content-wise substantive takeaways that I have. The second one, if I may squeeze in, is the fact that, again, it comes back to my earlier point, maybe related to an earlier point, that there seems to be a lack of representation from Southeast Asia. But even for Singapore, I think that Winston and I have talked about this multiple times. I think we are often hoping and wishing for there to be a bigger cohort of scientists who are passionate, who are willing to get involved in not just doing the science, but also translating and communicating the science, in engaging with the public and private sectors, the people sectors, to create impact from the science that we produce. So this talent pipeline of climate and sustainability scientists, science, I think it's very important to cultivate for Singapore and also for the region. And I hope in future COPs there will be many more scientists and researchers joining the Singapore Pavilion or joining the Singapore delegation to speak to the issues that we are concerned about in Singapore and also in the region from the scientific perspective.
Yep, thanks, Semping. You're hiring students, are you?
Yes. we seem to be running a recruitment drive for our different sectors.
But he's right. Prof. Koh is right. I mean, it's important to engage. We want to, propagate this forward. We want to make sure that there is a sustainable pipeline of educated youths or educated members of public to make sure that the sustainability actions that require whole of community efforts is taken up. You can work with us. You can intern with CLC, you know, or in the private sector, or work with MJ and things like that, or anybody else in the room. So please keep that in mind. Okay, on to Elaine.
So the COP28 had a great sense of energy, and I think everybody was very engaged there. And I think one of the key takeaways I have is that it is important to continue to be engaged and to play an active role in contributing to the discussions and to the agenda. So it was a great effort that at the COP28, Singapore had played a very key role in facilitating the conclusion of the first global stocktake to review the collective progress towards the goals in the Paris Agreement. And that can be brought forward, and more can be done if we continue, and we should continue to look at how we can have more knowledge exchange and mind share, and to look at objective data to help us get there. Because the power of our humankind is our knowledge. And so there should probably be more international collaboration or research across different areas. Already the IPCC is doing a wonderful job, and looking forward to your further contribution. And one of the key things is that apart from those global conversations, we should also bring those conversations back to home and what that means for us. So for instance, at COP28, CLC and an industry player, Rambo, came together and we signed an MOU at COP28 to share knowledge and to work on a series called the Urban Lab program, where we'll start to look at cross-sectorial work that can be done, the intersection of different sectors across multi-stakeholders in how we can create a regenerative city. And that is a new concept that is currently being discussed at the global level amongst our industry players, among the academic circles, and it all stemmed from a biological science. But now we're seeing how can we translate that application to the built environment, especially in Singapore's urban context. And so that we will kickstart with an online lecture next week on 15 January, and you are free to sign up online at the CLC website. And then that will be followed by a series of workshops together with our agencies, our academics, our industry players, our non-profits as well, to crack the code on what is this, so that we can bring Singapore, or really to share that knowledge across other cities as well, to achieve and work towards not just net zero, but climate positivity. And with that vision, to align everyone, we can move forward.
Thanks, Elaine. Good linking of that need for engagement and energy, and linking up with what we already know in Singapore, with the sort of good work that's done here from research institutes, from autonomous universities, from institutes like CCRS, to a broader audience. And I guess that also speaks towards the need to enable action. So thanks for that. MJ, your biggest takeaway?
I'll be brief and squeeze in 3 takeaways. I'll be brief, I promise.
Please, okay.
All right. So being at COP for the first time, it was pretty overwhelming for me, but I really appreciate the experience. In fact, I tell people it's life-changing. Might be a little bit exaggerated, but okay. So my 3 key takeaways. First of all, is the fact that national interests of all countries will always take precedence, no matter what. There's not a single country will go in and like, I'm going to do it because I want to save the planet. I'll do it for free. Because no country will willingly commit to ambitious climate goals without seeing any tangible benefits for it. And it's important that we recognize that, because this is the reality of the pragmatic world that we live in. So countries, they operate within frameworks of economic growth, political stability, and also societal well-being. And that often overshadows a lot of the global environmental concerns that people have. And to recognize that, and that's where we can really find ways to move forward. They have to see value in the work that they're going to commit to. Then it has to be a win-win situation. So I think I really see that coming through during the negotiations at COP28. And I thought that was a very important point for us, especially youth also, to understand, because that's where we can actually give constructive feedback and move forward together as a society. Second point that I realized is that, so this came up to me. This realization came up to me when I actually managed to shadow a closed-door negotiation of Minfu and another country. Of course, I cannot say who lah, but So the country came in as like, we will not phase out fossil fuel at all. That is impossible immediately. So Minfu's job was to facilitate the conversation and try to reach a compromise, right? And I realized, I thought that being in this field, being a COP negotiator, is to do a lot to do with intelligence. You have to be smart. You have to have a wealth of knowledge in this field. But that's only part of the equation. What you need most is wisdom as well. So if intelligence is the ability to respond to any arguments that's being thrown at you, wisdom will be the ability to pick out which arguments to respond to and which part of the argument to respond to and which part of the arguments that you can let go of. So I do see that. I don't really see that in a lot of the leaders that I witness, and I felt that that moment for me was very important because I see Minister Fu and her team just trying to reach a compromise with the opposite party. So it's like, okay, based on my understanding, is this what you want? Can we see phasing out fossil fuel as a long-term goal instead? We don't need you to do immediately. What is the problem that you face? Do you need more time? Do you need more money? So it's like a little tango dance between both countries. Yeah, and I think a lot of people's skills, interpersonal skills are needed in that situation. So that was a very pivotal moment for me in that short 30 minutes. That's like, oh, okay, we actually need much more than just intelligence alone. We need this wisdom from people. And last but not least, I realized that despite the efforts that we make, sometimes we might not achieve the goals that we want. I think we see that with, Article 6 at COP. And a lot of times it's like, what happens afterwards? Do we stop here? Do we see it as failure? Or what can we do about it? And I do see the team like bringing themselves together and trying to figure out ways, for the next COP, new plans for the next COP. And I thought that was a very important moment for me as well. What is a good outcome, right? Like for COP. So I remember a quote that Melissa Lowe mentioned during CYDP that, an acceptable outcome is also when everyone leaves COP feeling slightly unhappy. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting way to see things, right? Like you might not get everyone like being satisfied, that's impossible. But if everyone leaves slightly unhappy, that's actually a pretty much acceptable outcome, which I thought was the case for this COP. Personally, it's my one and only COP, right? I thought it was a good outcome for me, or rather acceptable outcome. So these are my 3 takeaways.
Thanks, MJ.
Thank
Appreciate that very strong personal viewpoint because you reveal a lot of the workings behind the curtain. And you can see how difficult the negotiation process is and how different stakeholders are trying to get their own views in. And bringing that out really reveals how difficult these conversations can be. Lastly, Esther, one takeaway.
A quick one, yeah. So I think I can summarize it into the 4I pillar, which is also happen to be our own CDL's sustainability pillars, that, integration is important. The science is very clear. Data are very clear. So now it's like, how do you turn data and into target, and how do you turn target into action? So innovation, investment, that the other 2 I's are very important. No point to just talk about technology, but if you you can't mobilize the finance, financial sector to support your action, it will be just talk, right? And of course, impact is now I mentioned about reporting is very important. So these 4 I's are very, very important. And I think the best way to preach is, by doing it. Yeah. So from a business perspective, I think at our SG, pavilion, it was very strong focus of finance. Being international financial hub, I think Singapore has a lot to offer, not just about the technology, but also the good governance, the track record, and also like taxonomy and standards for carbon offsetting, and as well as sustainability reporting. So all these Singapore can play a key role, although our carbon footprint globally is very, very minimal. But we can do a lot to mobilize resource, technology, ideas, and people to drive change. So from the business perspective, we always look at the triple bottom line. Whatever happened to the planet and climate, it has an impact on people and prosperity. No point to talk about prosperity if you don't have people and planet. So that is what we believe in, and that was also why education is very important. And do visit our, melting ice exhibition at the Singapore Botanic Garden. Is closing in one more month's time. So look at how rising sea level is really a threat to humanity, especially in our region. So do visit it and learn more. And definitely the Green Gallery is also a net zero building. Yeah, Thank you.
Thanks, Esther. I think that exhibition, which is good, by the way, worth visiting, you may need to update the sea level rise projections after today's report.
Yeah, we are going to change the green plan video just launched. We have planned for it already.
Okay.
Action.
With the very limited amount of time we have left, and I beg your indulgence because we started late, I want to give a shout out to a lot of the very good questions, if they can be flashed up on the screen. They were addressed to various, we tried to cover as many of them through our answers, ranging from maladaptation to sustainability to private-public partnerships, to how businesses can use the V3 data towards education. There was also a very cheeky question, which I will tell MJ later, but not now. Whoever that person is, very cheeky of you to ask. But there is one question which I think will be a good way to cap off this discussion. And by the way, thank you for submitting these questions. And I think the panelists here will be happy to address some of them in person after this session ends. But the question on climate fatalism, if that can be brought up. It was a question relating to how new climate change projections, hope becomes increasingly a scarce resource. Many people, especially youth, the next generation, are losing hope, leading to views like anti-natalism, i.e. not wanting to have kids in a world of climate change, and climate fatalism, the belief that we are essentially doomed. So the question is, what would the panelists' message be to these people who are losing hope? What gives us hope? So just think about that first, and I'd like to challenge you to give an answer within 30 seconds in terms of what message can you give to these people to give them hope, to inspire the change that's needed. Any takers in this? And this will be a great way to end the panel.
Well, I always say that I survived for almost, 2.5 decades, more than that actually, in sustainability, and that's always naysayer, but when there are challenges, but you can also turn challenges into action and also opportunities. And I believe in hope there will be, you will find way. One door closed, the other door, windows will open. So we do engage youth a lot, and this is one of our youth leaders as well, and some of them in the audience. And we need to tell them, inject that positivity in them, turn their depression into positive action. That is what we believe in. We have a Youth for Climate a network that, in partnership with an MSE, every year we actually introduce a lot of events and webinar and all that. So, well, we hope that we can contribute to a positive thinking among all these young people. Yep.
Thanks, Esther. Anyone wants to follow up on that? Quick follow up.
Maybe I will go
Please,
next.
Thanks.
So for me, the idea about hope has a relationship with the idea about resilience. So when you are resilient, you either hold that hope, or it's because you hope for a better future, that you deal with what challenges you have today and be resilient and think through the solutions, be innovative in order to get to where you want. So for me, it goes back to the conversation we had about community resilience as a society. Our agencies doing their best to give us the most resilient infrastructure, and our communities coming together in many ways. So this is a whole society effort. We should continue this deep engagement, this deep conversation, and drive the agenda that will save all of us. Yeah, so don't lose hope. Yes.
Thanks, Elaine.
Yes, wow, a very deep question. I'll echo the thoughts of one of my most inspiring idols in the world, Sylvia Earle. So she mentioned about hope a lot, and she said, back 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we don't even know what is wrong with the world. We don't know that the Earth is facing such climate issues. But now we know, and I think that's something to be celebrated. Just imagine what if we still don't know at this moment in time. So the fact that we know, and we can do something about it, there's no better time to do it than now. That gives me hope, and I hope that gives people hope. Oh wait, hold on, that sounds a bit weird, but anyway, you get what I mean. And I think working with schools, with young children, I do see a lot of them putting in the effort, and that really gives me hope in the younger generation, seeing that we are instilling such concepts in our younger children, the younger generations, from preschool to primary school, and also being in a community of youths where everyone is really trying their best to contribute their own efforts to sustainability, to climate issues. I think that brings me hope also. yeah, I wouldn't have been here if I'm not inspired by the friends that have been sharing information with me. I've been learning so much from them, and they inspire me every day. So I think, yeah, 2 years ago, I don't even know what COP is about, but here I am today. So I think that gives a lot of people hope as well.
Yep. Thanks, MJ. Of course, final word belongs to you.
Final, okay. Very big question. So I think 2 points. One is a point that I like to make in other places, other venues as well. It's the fact that the planet actually doesn't need us, right? The planet will do just fine. The planet will survive, or has survived for billions of years, will continue to be around for billions of years more, beyond us, beyond humans. So in that sense, our future really depends on what we do. So it's in our own hands. And in that regards, both the IPCC's many reports and also the V3 outcome and projections are telling us that there are ways forward, there are paths forward, there are solutions, and we just have to will and the ambition and the patience to act on those opportunities and solutions. So I think in that sense, I am positive.
Thanks. Okay, with that said, can I please invite the audience to thank the panelists on stage for their sharing their views. And thank you all for being such a wonderful audience. Again, apologies we can't answer your questions, but I think we'll be free to try and discuss them after this session ends. Back to the MC, over to you.
So thank you, Professor Chow and panelists, for sharing your thoughts. Once again, may we invite you to remain seated on stage for a quick photo, please. Thank you, panelists. So with that, we have come to the end of the symposium on Singapore's third National Climate Change Study. And we thank all of you for joining us here today. We hope that the symposium has been interesting, it has been insightful, and that the V3 findings will guide your work towards a more climate resilient future. So we have prepared a short feedback form accessible via the QR code you see on the screen, and we would appreciate your feedback on V3 as well as the event. We have also been informed that there are still refreshments behind the room, so please feel free to help yourselves and to continue the very good discussions we've had here today. So thank you once again for joining us here today, and we wish everyone a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.